It's October, and that means it is time for some spooky crochet stories. I'm going to actually read some of those from Reddit and do a little bit of a reaction video. And if you like these, make sure that you invite the like button over for a little yarn chicken of your own. And of course, subscribe so that you always have something to work on when you are doing your next favorite amigurumi project. Let's dive in. Okay, the first one up. I'm going to read these. This is the first time I'm reading them, so I don't know how I'll do on that, but we'll post those as well, share them so that you can see them. Once upon a time, I was young and stupid. I decided I was going to make a blanket, even though I had no idea how to make said blanket. So I figured I could just make a bunch of squares and sew them together to make a pretty pattern. So that's what I did. I bought the most expensive yarn my 16-year-old self could find and brought it home. It looked like yarn on the outside. I couldn't touch it because it was wrapped up in plastic, but the paper liner thingy showed a blanket, so I figured it would work. It turned out to be thread. Thread, you guys! I could have cried. Instead of driving the hour back to return the $50 that I spent on thread, I went ahead and started my crochet. It showed a blanket. I was getting my blanket. I had hooks small enough to work thread, so I started chaining and chaining and chaining, and it was horrible. I couldn't see the stitches, my fingers locked up on me, the size of squares I had planned were taking 150 plus chains to make, the stuff of nightmares. I ended up giving some of it to my boyfriend's grandma because she did lace work, and she loved it. The rest I stashed away until I could get back and return it. I forgot to return it. Found it 2 years later, burned it, and that felt good. So I love this story because it kind of talks about the horrors of yarn. Like there are so many different yarns that we could use, and there are so many different yarns that we really hate, that the type of yarn in and of itself is kind of that horror story, right? So for me, it's the Red Heart Scrubby yarn. That's the one that I least like using so far of all the yarns that I've used, which, to be honest, aren't that many, but so far that's the one that I like the least. So yeah, I totally get the horror yarn stories. That kind of goes with that. So our next story. The first project I ever made was a hat. I was so proud of it, especially since I was really terrible at learning how to crochet. So I learned how to make a hat with a little pom-pom on top. And I just kept making the same thing, in different colors, but otherwise the same thing, and giving them to people, family and friends. But I never saw any of them wearing them. When I asked about it, I was given the wide-eyed stare that a squirrel might give you as the headlights of your automobile face it down in the middle of the street. Everyone would either change the subject or brush me off. Like, nah, it's not cold enough for that. What do you mean? It's freezing outside. Actually, I just prefer my old hat. Eventually, I practiced more and learned how to get better and better. And that's when it dawned on me. No one would wear my hats because they were hideous. So, you know what? I totally get this one too. This is kind of that idea that we're so proud of the time and effort that we put into something. And sometimes we've put so much time and effort into it that we don't see the flaws. Or we're a lot more forgiving of those flaws. I mean, you know, I can still, well, no, I don't think I ever liked this guy. He was bad from day one. But the idea, I can look back at a lot of my projects now and say they were bad. It's okay, and that's why I sort of try not to gift items to people unless they specifically ask me for something, and then I give them that. My husband says that I don't give myself enough credit, but I think I'm trying to avoid horror stories like this where somebody absolutely thinks that it's hideous and they just don't have the courage to tell me. So I think that's really where that comes from. I donate baby blankets for the Navy and Marine Corps Relief Society's new baby program. It's an amazing program, by the way. Anyway, they set up a bunch of restrictions, like they can't have too big of holes or too much texture. They have to be pink, blue, or white and of a specific brand of yarn, but they provide the yarn. And they have to be 36 inches square. I always used to work them up from the center to do basic patterns like giant granny squares to ensure they were square. Well, I got brave one day and decided to try a new pattern and work from the bottom up. I got 30 inches in length into it and realized I didn't count my stitches. One side was perfectly straight and the other way too wavy. That's when I decided to rip it out and start over. I tangled the yarn so badly, I just gave up. Counting stitches, I have a love-hate relationship. I'm sure most of you can kind of get that as well. I know that I need to be better at counting my stitches, and doing this test pattern that I'm working on right now has really proved that to me, because the number of times that I get through and I'm like, it's just not right because I didn't count the stitches, or I started the stitch where the pattern designer didn't start the stitch, and so it's a little bit off from that perspective. That can totally throw a whole project off. So I am working on ways to get better at counting the stitches that is a little bit better for my non-mathematical brain. We'll go with that. So if you have any ideas, I use stitch counters, I use stitch markers, I use all kinds of different stitch stuff, but I'm still kind of looking for that great plan on that one. Happened last week. I had my 108 tricolor granny squares all finished and ready to be assembled into a blanket, chilling in a canvas bag. These took a furious 6 weeks to complete. The next day, my sister cleaned my apartment for me as a surprise. And, surprise, she spilled scented wax all over them. 16 squares bit the dust completely. Several more needed the outside stripe or so redone. I nearly cried. Her intentions were good. Oof, that's a rough one, because it's like they're doing something that they meant good things. So it's hard to be mad at them for sure. And yeah, I get it. It's just sad. I crocheted an interlocking circle scarf just to find out that I had interlocked half the scarf backwards. It was my first major project too. I haven't had time to crochet since then, and now I'm sad. The moral is to always, always double check your work and where you are before proceeding. To add insult to injury, it was an extremely expensive yarn that luckily I got at my thrift store. Okay, well, that's at least for sure a good thing, because sometimes those yarns can get really expensive, and that can be really scary. So let's see, my horror story. I don't think I have any what I would call major horror stories when it comes to crocheting yet. I think I've been really fortunate that, or I just have a different mindset around it. Like I've crocheted sweaters that turned out to be too small, and instead of just tossing them, I crocheted a panel that I sewed into it so that it kind of made it bigger and roomier. I have, come up with these terrible designs, and I'm like, or well, this wasn't a design, but you can see the stuffing through them because my stitches aren't tight. And I just look at those as learning opportunities and practice and experience more so than I look at it as a horror story. I haven't had any situations where I ran out of yarn. I don't know. I think maybe the most horrible thing that I've experienced is losing my hook and not being able to find it at the moment. And hopefully we'll continue with that pattern and not have any major horror stories. So share with me what your worst nightmare horror story crochet is. I mean, I've heard some real terrible ones that weren't in this particular Reddit thread, but some of them are like getting stabbed with crochet hooks. So there used to be these ergonomic, maybe they're still around, but there are these covers for your crochet hooks that were fat so that you can crochet a little bit more comfortably. And I was hearing about one horror story where she was trying to get this on and she was like pushing on it and ended up, yeah, okay, we're not going to go there. Yeah, she ended up in the ER because of trying to get this particular crochet ergonomic cover on her hook. So there are definitely some crochet horror stories out there. Share with me again what yours are in the comments below. Like and subscribe so that we can continue the conversation and build the community and just have a little bit of fun while we are enjoying our pastime. Thanks. We'll see you next week.